It's time for another episode of Corner of the Galaxy from the Box, a show that gets you behind the scenes of the LA Galaxy and into the minds of soccer reporters and MLS experts. Your hosts for the day are Corner of the Galaxy's Josh Guesman and LA Times soccer reporter Kevin Baxter. Let's start the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Corner of the Galaxy from the Box on cornerofthegalaxy.com. I'm your host, Josh Guesman, coming to you on Monday, November 16th. LA Galaxy in off-season mode. In fact, they're in radio silence mode as everything sort of plays out now. There was a press conference last week. We're going to get just go over that again. I know we talked about it on Thursday, but we want to touch on some different things there. Cristian Pavon, more talk about him. Chicharito, more talk about him as well. Some big sort of off-season issues that face the LA Galaxy, so we'll touch on that. A whole bunch of international news, some wacky rumor that we'll touch on and then dismiss almost immediately. And then looking at the roster and where the LA Galaxies can make some changes. To help me do all that, the Panda himself is back, Mr. Kevin Baxter. Kevin, how's it going, buddy?
There's already some coaching candidates surfacing in the Galaxy coaching search.
Yeah. Which ones? Which ones can we?
I've heard Ted Lasso's name mentioned.
Yeah, it's just because you went and rewatched the first 3 episodes of the first season again. You were enjoying
I don't know.
It.
This guy would bring together the locker room, I think.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, believe. That's what you say, and it's the hope that kills you. There's a lot of really great lessons that you can take from Ted Lasso. So, again, I think somebody said, the only reason or the only thing that can really bring this country together right now is episode number or season number 4 of Ted Lasso. So, they just have to. They've already gotten renewed for 2 and renewed for 3. So why not just say renewed for 4 straight on out, so that way we can have some hope going on for the next 4 or 5 years. Really sort of stretch it out.
You know how Jason Sudeikis described Ted Lasso? He says a combination of John Wooden and Mr. Rogers.
That's strangely accurate.
It is perfect. I think it's perfect.
It is very good. All right, let's get to a little bit of LA Galaxy here, and we're in off-season mode, so that means shows can last anywhere between 10 minutes and 2 hours. And however that ends up happening is sort of where we'll land. But I wanted to talk to you because we recorded a show on Thursday night, and obviously the LA Galaxy held a press conference last Wednesday. So Eric and I got to cover a lot of what was said on the press conference, but you also were there. I'd like to get your takes just on your general feelings coming out of that press conference and whether the LA Galaxy have convinced anybody that they are back on track.
Well, what struck me is Chris Klein and the mea culpa and the thing about, take responsibility. We got to look at everyone's performance. We're going to do a deep dive on this thing and find out where the problems are. When you look at that word, I mean, if you transcribed what he said and look at the words, black type on white paper, that looks good. That looks like exactly what he should be saying. But you know what? I went back and looked at his press conference after the 2017 season. Remember the 18 loss, 2 coaches season when they didn't make the playoffs, the whole going young and then bringing in Jonathan Dos Santos and Ziggy Schmidt midseason. Anyway, Chris Klein said almost word for word the exact same thing. Take responsibility, raise my hand, I'm the guy. We got to take a hard look at this. He said that 4 years ago. During that time, since that time, they've gone through 4 coaches, 66 players, 3 general managers, and they're right back to where they were 4 years ago. So either that deep dive didn't take last time or he didn't mean it. And if he didn't mean it and it didn't work, why should it work this time? I mean, the definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I think they have to do different things to expect different results. It hasn't worked for the last 4 years.
Well, and I think you made a point sort of in the press conference, too, is, the LA Galaxy have brought in 66 players and basically 4 coaches. Looking at all those things, how come it didn't work? I'll say that I tend to agree that, whenever you have championship success, that some of it is catching lightning in a bottle, right? Certainly. Some of it is just being in the right place at the right time, but a lot of that is how you set your team up for that success. And so you have to have the right combination of players with the right combination of coaching, and everything sort of has to line up for things to be, good. And when things are good, it's because you've been good, at doing the small things, at getting all the right details and getting everything pointed in the same direction. When things are bad, there tends to be just this general meandering of the club, and I think you've been seeing that. There's no straight course here, Kevin. There's no, we're back on track. Let's right this ship and get it pointed in the right direction. For too many times, we've heard that it's righted and it's being pointed in the correct direction, and we've seen nothing that sort of indicates that yes, it is on the right direction. I mean, Zlatan Ibrahimovic was great, Kevin, and the things that he did, we will probably never see in Major League Soccer again. Having said that, the LA Galaxy were not on sure footing just because Zlatan Ibrahimovic was there. That was the right player at the wrong time, and he dragged the LA Galaxy kicking and screaming into some sort of quote-unquote success that was far from the success really that you would expect from the Galaxy. So for me, I'm just not seeing, a plan. I'm not seeing a plan from Chris Klein. I'm not seeing a plan from Dennis Teclosa. I don't see where this LA Galaxy team is headed, and looking at the contracts that are expiring and the players that are out there, I still don't feel like there's a solid core to sort of build around and go forward. Is any of that unfair?
No, and you made a couple of good points. The Zlatan thing, he did make the team better. He did make the team better, but I mean, he didn't make the plan better. It was sort of just throw the ball forward for Zlatan, and it worked because he was so good. I mean, right. 30 goals. But you didn't see a structure. And if you go back to the early Bruce Arena years, and a lot of MLS people will do this, and they'll say, look, the Galaxy are all about big players, all about celebrities, all about bringing in the big stars. And not really. I had a chance to talk to Tim Leiweke way before COVID when, David Beckham was getting ready to debut his season. And Tim Leiweke said, look, when they brought in David Beckham, that was not the guy that was supposed to make them a winner. They needed to get David was a midfielder. They needed to get a scorer. It was Robbie Keane. So the point being, they just didn't go get the biggest names. They got guys that fit together. They were lucky to get a David and a Robbie that worked together with Landon, and they all fit together, and that's what made that team good. I think the Galaxy still feel like, look, if we just go get big names, if we go get Steven Gerrard, if we go get Zlatan, if we go get Chicharito, it'll work the way it used to. And there was a plan back there in 2011, 2012. There's not a plan right now. And if you talk to people around MLS, as I have done, owners and general managers and even players, they will tell you Seattle has a definition and a culture. We know what they're about. We know how they're going to play. Portland does. LAFC does. Atlanta does. All these teams, if Toronto, all the successful teams have a culture. They have a philosophy of how they do things, and their acquisitions and the way they put their team together reflects that. I don't see that with the Galaxy. I see at times 11 players, sometimes 11 pretty decent players, but they're not playing together. They don't fit together, and I think that's what's really missing with the Galaxy. It's just they've been throwing things against the wall, hoping they fit, and they're not fitting. It doesn't seem to be a plan or a culture. And I think that's the problem. And I think that goes back 4 years, to when Chris Klein talked about we're going to figure this out. They didn't figure that part of it out.
Yeah, there was such a if you go back to the successful teams for the LA Galaxy, there was such an identity of how the LA Galaxy were going to play. And then not only just how they were going to play, but whenever there were people who got injured or there were people who, fell off, there was somebody else who stepped forward and was able to fill that. I mean, you look at somebody even like a role player like Chad Barrett, who was instrumental in getting the LA Galaxy to an MLS Cup and then, breaks his ankle just before an MLS Cup and ends up, you have Adam Guesman step in and is the starter for your MLS Cup victory. I mean, there's little things like that, Kevin, where it's like, yeah, you lost a guy, but you have somebody else who knows how you play. You have somebody else who understands what the system is and how they fit into that system. And yeah, you may have to tweak some things a little bit here and there, but overall, the system itself is still as strong, even if it's, a little bit different, is still strong enough to be, sort of these championship teams. You're not seeing that with the LA Galaxy. There's drop-offs, massive drop-offs between starters and guys who come off the bench. And it's not so much that the guys who are on the field are so much better that, it's not like you had Robbie Keane and then you drop down to, God bless him, Chad Barrett, right? I mean, it's not like that was the drop-off that you're like, oh man, it's just this giant cliff and it's horrible and blah, 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 all these things. It's that you had pretty good players on the LA Galaxy right now. You have pretty good players, but then there's not anybody who's even decent underneath that. And so it's been a lack of spending, I think, in like positions 12 to 18 and 12 to 20, and maybe not even spending, but a lack of, identification and recruitment. The LA Galaxy are not a deep team. We knew that the entire time. And you saw that suffer in a, condensed season. And even if you have a normal season in 2021, which, Kevin, MLS says they're going to start in March, right? Those are the reports. They say they're going to start in March. They say they're going to do everything the way that they're supposed to do. And we're going to have a relatively unaffected season next year. That's the plan right now. But if it doesn't start that way, you have to look at the LA Galaxy and how they're constructed right now, and can they go through another season where it's a condensed schedule and everything's sort of crazy? I don't think this team can survive that.
Well, and you talk about whether they're going to start in March, and they say they are, and what MLS is saying is the national team schedule for all national teams, international breaks with Nations League and then the Olympics, if that goes forward, and Gold Cup and then World Cup qualifying, that the schedule is just too crowded. But I'm not sure that the ink is dry on that plan yet, because MLS would have to start again with empty stadiums, and we know they get a significant amount of their revenue from game day sales and sponsorships and things. So, I'm just not sure that decision has really been made, because it does affect the finances of every team in the league and how they do things, and it affects the media. Remember, they're trying to negotiate now a new media deal coming up. So it affects everything. And we see where the pandemic's going now. I don't anticipate the Lakers and Clippers are going to supposedly open the season next month, and they're going to be playing, granted indoors, but they'll be playing without fans for the foreseeable future. With where the pandemic is right now, March might not be a place where we can get fans back yet.
Yeah, I think you're getting close, though. I mean, March, April, May seems like, at least on a trajectory, and you've been seeing the different venues. There's been hints of sort of what could be happening with venues from like AEG and the different things where, they're going to require basically proof of vaccine and different thing like that in order to actually attend things in person again. And I think you're going to have that play out probably through the next couple of years. So, I mean, I think they're not totally, and I think that's what they're banking on, is that, March, they may have to play, 3 or 4 games without fans in some of their stadiums. In some places, it'll probably be just like it is now, Kevin, where we've seen limited capacities across, a bunch of different teams, just not here in LA. So, you're seeing that. And so maybe they're going to turn it. But I mean, that really goes into, sort of transitioning from the press conference over to Cristian Pavon, because this has been a big following point, and we've long said that if the LA Galaxy want to keep Cristian Pavon, then they can't be paying $20 million for him. That's a non-starter. It's not going to happen. And with reports out there now saying it's closer possibly to $10 million, now you're starting to get into, I said, this is almost like it's downright reasonable. And I know we talked about this on Thursday, but it really seems that the LA Galaxy do have some leverage here with Cristian Pavon. But going back to AEG on this, AEG has been hemorrhaging cash with all their major concert venues and sports teams and everything, shuttered or playing behind closed doors and not being able to have concerts and doing all this stuff. I mean, you're talking about, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Kevin, that hasn't been able to really generate any cash whatsoever for really going on almost a year. By the time maybe this comes back around, does AEG have the bandwidth, one, to invest in the LA Galaxy? They have the cash to be able to invest in the LA Galaxy to the tune of a $10 million transfer fee for Cristian Pavon.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'll tell you that I have been writing for months that this was where we were going to end up on this. That the $20 million fee, I think, was a non-starter. I think that was Boca Juniors just blowing smoke. Maybe, when Pavon was playing so well in the summer, maybe they thought, hey, a European team might get interested, and that $20 million will look attractive to them. It was a non-starter with the Galaxy, and Dennis DeClosa said that all along. I had written a couple times that these conversations were going to start around $10 million, and that's where we are right now, and that's reasonable. Can the Galaxy pay it? As you said, that's the other question. There's nobody in the stands. They're losing money. They're not going to get a bump, from jersey sales and other things with Pavon. So financially, it's a difficult, it's a tough lift. But on the other side, talking about the Galaxy not having an identity, I mean, here's a guy who's been your best player all season. He does we do know what he brings. He's versatile. He gets assists. He scores goals. He can do a lot of things. this is a guy that has a chance to give your team an identity, and you could set your team up around him. Chicharito may not be the guy that pairs with him. I don't know. You got Chicharito for another $12 million, so you got to work something out. But Pavon is a guy that gives you a chance at a playing style. And Dennis DeClosa, his first 2 years here, he's had a lot of loans. Antuna didn't get to stay. Fabio Alvarez didn't stay. They had to go. This is another loan that was a good player, an attractive loan. If Dennis isn't able to keep him, I think that starts you start to get black marks against Dennis too, and he has Yanni Gonzalez as a loan too. I mean, we've got to start turning some of these loan players into guys who stay and give you some production year over year. I like Pavon. Is he a $10 million guy? I actually think that's not a bad price for him, but it may be too high in a pandemic. If this was a year ago or a year from now, I don't think it would be a problem. This might be a difficult contract to swallow at this time.
Yeah, it's interesting. You really want to dive into this. Go follow my good friend John Rojas. Has been all over this particular story, talking about really the fact that Boca would have to pay Pavon the same salary that he was receiving at the LA Galaxy, which is considerably more than what he was making at Boca whenever he came back before he left, and that is a financial strain to some extent. To Boca. There's also the fact that the LA Galaxy, again from John Rojas, sort of looking and saying, give me a comparable market right now. Give me a guy who is of similar talent and has been sold for some sort of money since the pandemic has sort of gone through, and right now there doesn't seem to be sort of that comp, right? Whenever you're buying a house, Kevin, you always get the comps from the area around there. It's like, well, how much is this house worth? And we have these 7 sold around it. Well, the LA Galaxy looking for that comp, that comparable player who's sort of sold, so that way they can really gauge the market. And the bottom line is there hasn't been a lot that has traded hands in the Cristian Pavon range since the pandemic started. So they don't have that, and because of that, they sort of have to break new ground on this. Well, whenever you don't have that comparable there, Kevin, it means that the LA Galaxy could have a realistic view that Pavon is worth $5 million, and Boca Juniors could have a realistic view that Pavon is still worth $15 or $20 million. And there's no bridging that gap if you can't sit there and say, listen, we know this is unreasonable and this is what it has to be. Cristian Pavon wants to stay in LA. We know that. So there's leverage there for the LA Galaxy that Cristian wants to stay. He doesn't want to go back to Argentina. It would be a bit of a reset for him if he has to go back to Boca Juniors. And we all know that eventually Cristian Pavon, who's 24 years old, Kevin, eventually wants to go to Europe as well. So all of these things sort of leaning in Pavon's favor in terms of keeping him happy and keeping him in LA and hopefully continuing that move to Europe if all those things can sort of line up.
Well, here's a couple of things. I'm not sure. I know that the Pavon wants to stay here was big when GBS was here. I don't know if that's changed since he got fired. I don't think it has.
I mean, Dennis said specifically, both whenever I talked to him on my one-on-one with him, 2 Thursdays ago, basically, and he said it in the press conference too. He knows for a fact that Cristian Pavon wants to stay. You're right. It may have changed, but Dennis is still telling the same story.
Well, and here's a couple of things. I mean, if both sides want to get creative, you got to look at this. If you look at the situation from both sides, honestly, Boca is hemorrhaging money like the Galaxy are. They need money. They can't, like you said, they can't afford to pay his salary. So, if they can't get 10 million, would they take 8 million? Would they take 5 million? That might be better than nothing. That might be better than taking this guy back at a salary that they can't afford, because they are really cash strapped right now. So, Dennis might be able to sort of even bring that price, it's already half. It's already gone from 20 to 10. He might be able to get that down even further. The other part is, when the Galaxy look at this investment, as you said, this guy's on his way to Europe. He's 24. He's an Argentine World Cup veteran. He's going to go to Europe at some point, and he's going to command a pretty steep transfer fee. That's money the Galaxy are going to get back. So maybe the Galaxy cough up money that they don't have now with the hope and belief that they're going to get it back down the road. Another way that they could get creative is with both sides realizing that we could be in this pandemic for a while. It could limit the number of games the Galaxy play. It could limit the number of fans they're able to play in front of. What if they were able to come up with some sort of compromise where, look, here's the transfer fee. It's $8 million. We're going to give you $8 million. But structure it in a way that's, look, if the Galaxy play 30 games next season and they're able to play half those games in front of a crowd, then Boca gets another $1 million. Something like that to sort of guard both sides. Boca's going to give up the player for maybe a little less than market value, but the Galaxy are protected if they have to play the season without fans.
Right. Right, and there's sell-on clauses as well, right? So maybe you could say that Boca retains 20% of Pavon, and you pay him $80 million or $8 million. $80 million sounds like too much. If you go $8 million, which sort of values him at $10 million, but if they ever get sold, then there's a whole bunch of things. There's also apparently a court case going on with Boca and the team that came from the team that Pavon played on previously. I think Talleres or Talleres, I believe is what it is. And so they're going to court to sort of sue each other and say, hey, we already prepaid you a whole bunch of money. Whenever there was a sell-on clause, we prepaid it at $2.5 million, so you already got your money, so don't be expecting any more money. And so there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, it's a full-on telenovela at this point in terms of some of the stuff that has happened with Cristian Pavon and his previous teams, Boca Juniors, and all these things. And it's really interesting because it's a huge piece that the LA Galaxy are trying to put into place if they do put them in place. And I think that regardless of any coach they pick, Kevin, any coach would happily have Cristian Pavon on their team, right? But the real question for me is, how much of these roster decisions, and we talked about it on Thursday, but, there's roster decisions that have to be made by, 11:30 on November 30th. The LA Galaxy have to make decisions on, extending options, making offers, denying options, those types of things, out of contract players, deciding not to offer them, contracts. There's some things that have to happen here fairly quickly, and you're doing it without a coach. And that has to be weighing on everybody that you're putting together a team without a coach in place.
Well, and there are difficult decisions. I believe David Bingham is one of the guys who's out of contract now. I realize that he may not be the most popular player with supporters, but he is a decent veteran goalkeeper. There's not a lot of those around. You got to make that decision by November 30th without really knowing who else might be out there. You can't sign David Bingham to a 1-year deal, presumably, as a veteran. And he's due a raise. I mean, what do you do about that? Do you believe Jonathan Klinsmann is ready? Do you think there's another person out there? That's just one position. It's up and down the roster. I think Rolf Felcher's out of contract, correct?
Yes.
So he's one guy they have to look at. There's other guys with options. You're right. I mean, and it would be nice to have the Pavon thing wrapped up by then, so you know how much money you have to spend.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that with a DP, right, you're not necessarily limited on cap space. You're limited on overall cash because eventually AEG is going to say we're not paying any more money. But for the most part, you're not worried about Pavon fitting into any sort of cap space. You sort of know if he's staying what his cap space hit is because as a designated player, and then you can pay him pretty much whatever you want as long as AEG has the money.
Right. No, it's not the cap space. It's just that if you decide he's worth $10 million, we're going to pay the $10 million. Well, then maybe you don't have $250,000 to give to Bingham or whoever else you might want to give that amount of money to. You may not have that extra money.
So for me, and this is how I look at spending on rosters, and you can tell me if you agree or not. The discretionary spend is on designated players and on targeted allocation money players, right? We realize that that's the extra money that the team has to kick in. For the most part, the LA Galaxy are always going to be 100% up against the salary cap, right? Anybody who fits under that salary cap, the Galaxy aren't going to be leaving money on the table for that salary cap unless they're looking for somebody like mid-season. There's going to be a little bit of wiggle room, but for the most part, there's not going to be a single dollar left on the table for the LA Galaxy whenever they're working the players that are going to fit under the cap. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but I mean, in Dennis's first year, it seems to me, my recollection, I don't have the figures in front of me, but my recollection is he spent a lot of money for Joe Corona. I seem to remember that was a rather expensive contract, especially now that Corona's a bench player. Pipo Gonzalez, I know he played well at the end of the season, but wound up being a bench player. He was making a lot of money. He's got another year left. We know what Jordan Shelvick was getting and presumably still is getting since he's on loan, right? They still have to pay him.
Well, so, I mean, there's some arguments about that.
They seem to spend there just seem to be they wanted to attract good players that they thought would fit into their system. It didn't really work out, but the point is they spent probably a little bit more than they had to spend to do that. And so now you're filling in with guys like the Galaxy have gotten really lucky in some ways, in that I think some of their lesser paid players, because they're young, because they're academy players, because they were developed, homegrown, guys like Zubek, I don't think are costing a ton of money. Julian Araujo, Alvarez, a lot of players that probably are not costing them a ton of money and have become very useful, sort of takes the sting out of some of the players that they've overpaid. But they need to get that balance right. And that's where, again, when you look at a Pavon, that $10 million that goes to the transfer fee isn't going to affect the salary cap, but I think it does affect how much money the Galaxy want to spend.
Well, it was interesting because I'm certainly of the argument that Cristian Pavon is a guy who you're going to spend a lot of money on, and in terms of marketing, overall marketing, you're not going to get a ton of return off of him because he's just not a well-known name outside of, diehard LA Galaxy fans. And listen, everybody who's listening to this podcast knows who Cristian Pavon is, and we can make a reasonable assumption how much money he's worth in terms of, playing Kevin. But in terms of actually marketing, he's a little bit of a smaller fish in a big pond whenever it comes to LA Galaxy signings. Certainly whenever you compare him to Zlatan Ibrahimovic, or if you now, compare him to even Chicharito. And it was interesting because you look at the two couldn't be more opposite this season, right? You had Cristian Pavon, who played every minute of every game, scored a bunch of goals, had a bunch of assists, was really the only heartbeat, one of the few heartbeats that was on the LA Galaxy this season. And you have Chicharito, who missed a ton of games, scored 2 goals total, gets paid ungodly amounts of money in terms of MLS size, right? And when you look at the jersey sales, which MLS announced, and I should point out, this is MLS announcing this. They don't tell you how many they actually sold. They don't tell you what dollar amount any of this stuff is. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't tell you if Zlatan Ibrahimovic still outsold all of the people on the list because he's no longer in the league. But it wouldn't surprise me if Zlatan Ibrahimovic was still outselling most of the guys on the list. But Chicharito, Javier Hernandez, finished second on jersey sales, which it's not surprising. But it is surprising because you look at number 1 and number 2. You had Carlos Vela, LAFC, who had number 1 selling jersey, and then number 2 was, Chicharito.
And guess who number 3 was?
Who was 3?
Josef Martinez. So we got 3 guys who basically didn't play this season.
I was going to say
1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I was going to say, which is why I'm even more convinced now that Zlatan Ibrahimovic still outsold both of them this year on his old jersey.
And the league's leading scorer, Diego Rossi, is 17th. So production really doesn't matter. I mean, it's a popularity contest. Raul Ruidiaz from Seattle is number 8. And by the way, while we're on that, just a Seattle thing, again, going back to that thing about, a team's personality. And I know we're going to talk about the Luca Modric thing in a little bit, but again, that Galaxy impression that they're about big names. And that's why anytime any European player is rumored to come to MLS, whether it's a fit or not, it's always, he's going to the Galaxy, he's going to the Galaxy. That's the Galaxy's MO. I had a talk with the general manager at the Seattle Sounders a while ago, Garth Langaway, about how he builds his team. And he said, look, our fans don't come out to cheer for jerseys. They don't buy jerseys. They don't come out to see celebrities. They come out to see the team win. And it goes back to what you're talking about with Pavon. Yeah, he may not be the most marketable guy, but he's the best player, and he helps the team win. And Langaway was talking about, look, we have Raul Ruidiaz, we have Ladero, we have people like that who, when we brought them over, the fans didn't know who they were. They didn't know their history, but they saw them play and said, these guys can help us win. I think you look at Atlanta, Almiron, Josef Martinez.
They spent a ton of money, though.
They did. But my point isn't that they didn't spend money. I know They did. And Seattle did too. My point is they didn't sign a name. They signed a player, and they brought the player in to win games. Portland's done the same thing. Diego Valeri.
Yes.
I think sometimes the Galaxy get caught up in, hey, this Chicharito guy, he's a big name. And I backed the signing of that. I was a big Chicharito booster. But they look and say, Chicharito's going to come in here. Steven Gerrard's going to come in here. They're going to sell a lot of jerseys. And if we win some games, that would be great. I think they got that backwards. I think it should be the other way around. If we win games, that'd be great.
No, see, and I disagree. And this is the simple.
So you'd rather finish last with a whole bunch of celebrities? No,
and that's the false argument that everybody puts together all the time. And it's a BS argument. The argument isn't that you shouldn't sign that you should absolutely. If you're Atlanta, go out and sign those guys that you signed, and hey, you did really well up until a certain point when all your extra allocation money fell off the cliff and you suffered for it, and guys got injured, and you found out the team wasn't as deep as it was supposed to be, and they did really well together, which is good. Everybody's up pumping Philadelphia right now, which again, it's like, hey, Philadelphia did it the right way. This is the way everybody's going to go. Philadelphia, had a lot of young players, and they came forward. I'll tell you right now, Los Angeles is not Atlanta, and it's not Philadelphia. Look at some place like Toronto, where they spent a ton of money on well-known players and guys who really can play together, and they had a ton of success. I mean, Seattle works just because absolutely 100% the way that you said it works, right? Which is they're able to go out there and they're able to sign guys who aren't big names, except that they went out and got Clint Dempsey whenever Clint Dempsey was a big name, right? I mean, they still wanted some star power in there, but they are certainly not the same as LA. I 100% agree with that. The only argument I've ever made with Los Angeles is that you have to have both things. You can't have one thing and not the other. How come the LA Galaxy's attendance went down the second year that Zlatan Ibrahimovic was here? They played better. What was the difference? Is that the previous year they didn't play better. With the name, they didn't create the kind of buzz that they should have created with the name. So you didn't have the name and the winning. And even in the year where they made the playoffs, you still didn't have the winning as much as you should have. So it's always the same formula in Los Angeles, and it will probably continue to be the same formula in Los Angeles. Is you have to have winning and you have to have stars. Those are the two things that continue to draw, at least for the LA Galaxy. And so going after Chicharito was correct if you thought he was going to be the best footballing guy for you and you knew he was a marketable star. Now, I think the LA Galaxy would have you currently believe, which is, I think, the most ludicrous thing that has possibly ever been said by this club, is that the marketing comes way last, that it's not important.
Well, Chris Klein just said that.
Yeah, and it's not even the right answer, right? I understand the pushback, and Kevin, you're certainly playing to that pushback, which is that a lot of the diehard LA Galaxy fans are saying we don't want names, we want a good soccer team, and yes, absolutely 100% true. I understand that for the diehards, but how many season ticket holders did the LA Galaxy have? Let's give them best case scenario. They have what, 9,500, 10,000?
Yeah, it's about half of what LAFC has.
So you're looking at the season ticket holders at 10,000, right? And again, I think I'm being generous. And how many seats? There's 25,000 roughly seats at Dignity Health Sports Park. So you have to sell 15,000 walk-up tickets for every single game, right? Well, you're not doing that with Cristian Pavon, no matter how good he is, because nobody knows who Cristian Pavon is. You and I will appreciate him. You and I will watch him. The diehard LA Galaxy fans will love him. Okay, all those things will be great, but they won't sell out those 15,000 seats that they need on walk-ups all the time. And so it has to be both. It has to be winning and it has to be stars. And Cristian Pavon could be huge if you have another star on the team that's also a very good player. He could play that second fiddle. He can sort of be in there. And listen, I say he's not marketable, Kevin, right? And he still had, the 21st highest selling jersey in Major League Soccer? And Jonathan Dos Santos had the 20th? I mean, there's some marketing things in here that are clearly even above my pay grade, but in my mind, you have to have both. And I think the LA Galaxy have missed just horribly on getting both. Outside of Zlatan was both marketability and play. Absolutely had it there.
What if they get creative? I mean, again, a guy that we're going to talk about in a minute. You know who's not on here? Sebastian Lletget. Here's a guy who has been around for 6 years now. Was second on the team in goals and assists, so he's a quality player. He's a national team player. He's playing in Hollywood. He's dating a pop star, movie star in Becky G. I mean, he seems to have a lot of things going for him that would make him a box office draw, and I don't see them marketing him at all.
I mean, yeah, you can certainly question the marketing on him. I think he fits in that perfect sort of role player the LA Galaxy have always sort of had, which was U.S. men's national team player, as you said, and a real solid guy. But he's not flashy. He's not going to score the most amount of goals. He's not going to draw these huge crowds. I mean, it almost feels like the time of the star U.S. men's national team player that was playing in Major League Soccer has sort of passed us by, right? Because the LA Galaxy used to have somebody, called Landon Donovan, who was sort of a star. He was a star. He was a well-known U.S. U.S. men's national team player. He drew fans, and when you added him and David and Robbie Keane, and by the way, Robbie Keane wasn't even I don't think a huge name here in the United States, but the fact that he was playing with David Beckham, and the fact that he was playing with Landon Donovan, and listen, people are going to give me crap for this, but this is local to Los Angeles. This isn't outside the world where everybody understands who Robbie Keane was. But in Los Angeles, the fact that he was on that team made him a star in Los Angeles, because we saw that in his MVP years, Kevin. We saw it whenever he would come out that he was a draw, that people wanted to be at the stadium whenever he was there. And I think that, that's one of the guys who maybe wasn't the most well-known name in the world. Certainly in world soccer, everybody knew who he was. But in Los Angeles, that wasn't the case, but he grew into it. Right, but you needed sort of the star power of David Beckham. You needed the star power of Landon Donovan to create that. I agree with you. I think that they miss marketing opportunities all the time. Like, how are you not just pumping up, your local guys like Julian Araujo? How come he's not on every billboard right now? Because that guy's going to be a star, and he's just absolutely connected with the community. I mean, this is a guy who should be, as big or bigger than almost anybody on that team right now.
Yeah, and I don't even see them. I mean, we talked about this last time, and you said you saw some beer commercials or something. I don't even see Chicharito or Jonathan Dos Santos out there that much. I do see them on the Galaxy billboards, which is what the team is doing, but I don't see a hue and cry in the community to get these guys involved in any projects or any supermarket openings or anything like that. By the way, with Sebastian Lletget, he did score for the national team today, his third goal as a national team player, and his first of 3 international goals that was not scored in Earthquake Stadium. His first 2 both scored in San Jose. So This is his first goal ever in Europe.
I mean, the fact is that if the U.S. men's national team starts playing the way that some people expect them to play, and Sebastian Lletget plays an integral role on that his star certainly will rise. But I'll tell you right now, there aren't a lot of people, I think, that are super excited for Sebastian. He had a good year this year. I mean, we should point that out. He trended up, and he did some things that he was supposed to be doing. Having said that, I don't think there was a bunch of fans out there who were just thrilled with everything Sebastian Lletget this year. I actually think that in terms of the diehards, Sebastian Lletget took a step backwards with a lot of fans, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But at the same time, you're looking at a guy, if he can be an integral part of the international game, and being put on these big stages and being played in a World Cup and all these things that sort of can lead to possibly an increased star for him, then yeah, I mean, he could be a really big name for the LA Galaxy. He's just not right now.
Did you watch the game today, by the way?
I got to watch some of it. I didn't get to watch all of it. What did you?
Because I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, Sebastian is a unique player in that, like you say, he's not a big star. He's not flashy. He's a worker bee. He's a blue collar guy, but he's also versatile. I see him as a guy that could have a future with this young European-based national team that Greg Berhalter is putting together. A guy that would be on the bench, come off the bench, provide some leadership. Maybe not play a ton of minutes, but the point I'm getting to is, how many MLS players do you think have a future with this team? I mean, maybe a Jordan Morris, but it's clearly going to a European core now. They're playing a different style of soccer, much different than you see with a lot of MLS teams. I'm sure people are going to throw a million names out there now, but Jordan Morris, maybe a Giassi's artist. There's maybe Josie Altidore could get back in there. I don't know that I see a ton of guys that are going to be stars or even starters, for this national team coming out of MLS. Yeah, no, it's
an interesting time, certainly. And I think that, first of all, there will be more MLS players on this roster than people will think, mostly because
Walker Zimmerman, I mean, he's a pretty solid center back.
All of a sudden, you've now named like 6 people who will probably be on that team. I mean, like I said, there's going to be a considerable amount. Now, whenever it gets down to the 18-man roster, how many of those guys see it? I think that Sebastian Lletget is a guy who could be a bridge. I'm calling all the players not, I think Sebastian Lletget today ruined a lot of U.S. men's national team like narratives They were, it's the young kids, and then Lletget comes in and scores a goal, and it's sort of like, well, we'll just forget about that because it's all about the young kids.
Yeah, I did. I just wrote around it.
Yeah, and to me, it's sort of like, no, there's going to be important MLS players that are going to play very important, integral roles on any sort of U.S. men's national team. And look at Julian Araujo, who has a possibility of being U.S. men's national team or Mexico. Look at Efrain Alvarez, who has a chance, on a youngish core, possibly for Mexico as well. So, I mean, there's some players on this LA Galaxy team who I think are going to be playing some roles in the next World Cup. And I think there's going to be some guys who are bridges. And right now, Sebastian Lletget is sort of caught in between, the old guard and the new guard. And he wasn't part of the old guard, and he's not part of the new guard, and he's in between there. And you sort of saw that he still has something to offer. We'll see if that continues. But, I mean, there's a big question here. The LA Galaxy tammed him at the beginning of this year, Kevin. So he's making, targeted allocation money funds. And I would argue that while he had a very successful year, that I feel like his star is starting to fade in Los Angeles. And so if you're the LA Galaxy, is it time to move on from him? Do you sell high? Jared Dubois, my old co-host, used to say, sell high, always sell high. Well, right now, from what you've seen from Sebastian Lletget, do you even take the chance, and do you say, hey, maybe this is a chance we get to move him at a salary that maybe is a little bit too high to keep him long term? I mean, those are the types of questions that are certainly going to be popping up in this offseason.
Well, and this is a name that you don't even know. Back in the days when Buzzy Bavasi was with the Dodgers, the philosophy always was in the front office, trade a guy a year too early rather than a year too late, which is, I guess, another way of saying sell high. I expect Efrain Alvarez and Julian Araujo to really get pressured by the Mexican national team, and maybe Ricky Ledesma, who played on the U.S. national team in Europe this week. And the reason I say that is when you look at the Mexican team, they were one of the oldest teams in Russia at the last World Cup. And you look at the team that they took to Austria to play South Korea, and they have another friendly coming up. It's still a very, very old core. And they're going to wake up one day and realize everybody on the team is over 30.
Right.
They're going to have to fill in behind that. And that's going to happen really quickly. And I think Mexico's going to come to guys like Efrain Alvarez and Ledesma and Julian Araujo and say, look at these guys they have there. Julian Araujo, do you really want to play right back? Are you better than Serginho Dest? Or can you play on the other side with a Reggie Cannon or Tyler Adams, whoever they might put over there? And I think Mexico's going to come and say, look, you have a place you could start over here if you come and join our team. And I think that selling is going to start real soon, because this American team looks like there's very few holes in it. And if you're an MLS player, probably be wise to start looking at your options now.
Well, Dennis DeClosa talked about how congested the schedule will be in 2021 with all the international games, World Cup qualifying, all those things that are sort of going to lead up to just some crazy, crazy year. I mean, we thought 2020 was crazy, and I think it'll probably still be the craziest year we've ever gone through. Certainly in my limited lifestyle of 39 years, 40 years, it is. But we'll see what 2021 I think has some surprises for us as well, and the congested nature of all the fixtures that are going to get played in 2021 is going to take a real toll on the LA Galaxy. We talk about, and Dennis talked about it, because he was talking about international players. He goes, understanding that they're going to be gone and we're probably going to have to play through their absences. You can't have 12 guys who are international players in your whole starting lineup, and all of a sudden it's an international break and MLS plays through it, Kevin, and you have nobody left on the field. So they're looking at that. I mean, you look at Sebastian Lletget, U.S. men's national team. You have Rolf Felcher, who played for Venezuela, and he was in a 1-0 loss to Brazil. Actually, really respectable for Venezuela whenever you think about it, playing against Brazil. Jonathan Dos Santos is away with Mexico. We talked about Efrain Alvarez, I think, is with the U20s in Mexico. Julian Araujo is being courted by the U.S. men's national team and Mexico. Pipo Gonzalez didn't play in Costa Rica's friendly, but Pipo still has another year left on his contract, and he's expected to be playing in with Costa Rica for those things. So there's a whole bunch of guys on this team who have national team ties, and whether you like some of these guys or not, there's a lot of starters that I mentioned whenever I was going through this, and so the LA Galaxy have to prepare for that as well. It's just another sort of piece of the puzzle that, again, you'd probably like to have a coach in play, and I don't think the LA Galaxy should rush it, but also understanding that 2021 might not be a normal season either. I'm still leaning heavily in the Dominic Kinnear camp, which is he knows who the players are. He knows what the holes are. Let him work with Dennis and let them fix things starting now, which is, you could easily make a deal with Dominic Kinnear this week, Kevin. You could do it this week and it could be done and you could be ready to rock and roll for the 11:30 roster decisions.
And he would attract a lot of players. I mean, the players do like him. And it's one of those things where you know what you're getting with Dominic Kinnear. There's a good side to that and a bad side to that. But you know what you're getting. And I think it's time for the Galaxy to stop guessing and shooting for the moon and take the solid option that's right in front of them.
Yeah, and it's, but there's a cross argument to that as well, Kevin, which is we're going to scour the earth, we're going to find the best manager and the best person for the job, and you have Dominic Kinnear in less than a couple weeks. I realize that kind of almost regardless of whether the LA Galaxy make a quick decision or a long decision, that there are criticisms that come with both of those, and I don't think there's any way to escape that, mostly because they've been horrible. If they had been good at any point and made some very good decisions, you can probably cut them a break, but for right now where they're at, that doesn't seem to be the case. Let's go a little bit to this crazy wacky rumor.
This makes
go ahead.
But this whole thing with the national team call-ups, I mean, this makes Chicharito more valuable because I don't think he's going anywhere.
No, he's not.
I was interested. We talked about this for the show. Jonathan Dos Santos, we know he's injured. We know people are getting COVID all over the place. We know Europe is a dangerous place to travel to right now. That's why the U.S. women's national team, they're going to the Netherlands for a camp later this month, and they had to get special dispensation just to fly into the Netherlands without quarantining. Two of the LAFC players of the Ecuadorian national team are 2 of 6 players for Ecuador that have COVID are now in quarantine. I don't understand why the Galaxy let Jonathan not only leave before the last game, but fly all the way to Austria if he wasn't going to play. And he gets there and they say, you're not going to play, you're injured. What was the point of that? Yes, he wasn't going to play for the Galaxy. I get it. But it just seems like that was not a wise decision.
Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like I refuse to put brain capital into that particular decision. It's just like that doesn't matter to me in the long. Everybody seems to be very interested in what Jonathan Dos Santos does in his off time. Everybody seems to be very interested in what Chicharito does in his off time. And for the most part, I don't want to waste brain space on either of those things.
Chicharito plays video games.
Yeah, see, I mean, that's like, why do I care? That's why should I have to care? I think I'm getting old, Kevin. I think I'm getting old and crotchety, and I don't care about things
Chicharito,
anymore.
get off my lawn.
Yes, basically, that's where I think I'm at. But I mean, the people who think that, and let's get to the let me dismiss wacky rumor. Luca Modric is not coming to the LA Galaxy for $12 million, and he's 35 years old. He's not coming for $12 million. If you thought that was real, it must have been a fun morning for you. And then in the afternoon, you probably figured out that no, it wasn't true. Or, by the way, who knows if it's true or not true? It just doesn't. It never reached the real sort of, well, $12 million makes a ton of sense to have Luca Modric here, and I would like to preface this by saying I don't know whether it's true or not, and I would imagine that it's not. It seems ridiculous. But at $12 million... Last
time they signed a 35-year-old European, it worked out really well.
Yeah, yes, and they also paid $1.5 million for him in the first year of that deal, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen, and this is why I do a very poor job, or at least I guess I don't sink as much interest into trying to predict who's going to become available and who the LA Galaxy should go after, because a name like Modric could show up. It could absolutely happen. And Kevin, it could show up. And maybe they were talking he was going to come on a 3-year deal, and it was going to be $6 million, or and it was going to be $4 million a year, and he's going to be here until he's 38. But it's a playmaker the LA Galaxy make. I mean, you'd never know what the details are. We get surprised all the time with these things. But looking at this one and trying to draw lines between how it would make any sense, you sort of sit there and say, I mean, yeah, the Galaxy need a player like him. I'm sure they would like a younger player than him, but having seen him play and sort of watched him play, in these recent years, he probably still has enough in the tank to be able to play for Major League Soccer. But at $12 million a year, does that make any sense?
But you got to step back and say, wait, we have one designated player spot open. $12 million is a designated player salary. So do we want Cristian Pavon or do we want Luca Modric?
Yeah. Absolutely correct.
That's a no-brainer. But you're right about, in covering this team, it's bizarre. I remember when the Steven Gerrard rumors came up. It's like, he's not coming here. The next thing you know, he's coming here. Gio Dos Santos was a little bit the same thing. I'm sure, when David Beckham signed it, I wasn't here then. I was still in Miami, but I'm sure that must have been sent shockwaves through. You just look at those and you say, there's no way that's going to happen. And then you wake up and that guy's in a uniform on the field. So you can, with the Galaxy, unfortunately, you can never say no. But again, that fits back into that personality of, do you look at the Galaxy and say, this does not make sense to the team they're putting on the field? It doesn't fit their personality. Or do you say, yeah, I can see them going after a European superstar. That's what they do. Yeah. You can make arguments both ways, and it just goes back to the fact that this team does not have a culture or personality right now.
If you're putting realistic dollar amounts on a Luca Modric deal, right? If Modric's just going to come to the LA Galaxy, and you put a realistic dollar amount on that, would you say, I would sit there and say, yeah, I get it. I know why you want to do it, and it makes some sense, and you can probably go out and make that deal. If it was a realistic dollar amount, it's not. It's 12 million. It's not a realistic dollar. So you have to always, I always say the money is the most important part of any deal, right? Because if I told you the LA Galaxy re-signed, Sebastian Lletget, you can sit there and go, okay, great. That makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah, Sebastian Lletget is a good player, and the LA Galaxy want to keep him on there. He's not great. He's not the superstar, but he's not horrible either. He's a very, very good player, and he's been around this team long enough that it would be, a good move for them. So you can say that. And I said, okay, well, the LA Galaxy are going to pay him $4 million a year. All of a sudden, that deal that you sat there and said, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You sit there and go, what were they thinking? No, that can't make any sense. You can't pay Sebastian Lletget $4 million a year. That doesn't make any sense. He's now a designated player. How does that even fit into things? It's always about the money. And so getting a 35-year-old European, I'm fine with it. I don't have age limits. I would love it. I would love it if the LA Galaxy go out and get guys who are, 28 and 29 and spend, $10-12 million on them. That's great too. But, at 35 years old, if you're going to spend, $1.5 million, and this person is going to come in and be a 10, the number 10 that you've sort of been missing, that playmaker that you're missing, it makes some sense. You can't just dismiss things based upon age. You really have to look at things more based upon money. And that's the only way these things ever make sense.
Well, okay. So based upon money, when you look and discounting the young players like Julian Araujo,
right? Who
is the most cost-effective player? I don't want to say the most underrated or underpaid or whatever. The most cost-effective player. I think it's Daniel Steres.
There's a good argument to that. Let's see. Steres at $150,000, and he's a starter, and he's your center back, and he's the captain, and he can do that. Yeah, I mean that makes some sense. And by the way, the 150 was from the 2019. I don't even know what it is for 2020, and the MLS Players Union is not going to release that information. It seems like this year. So
I think you can make a case for Zubek, but I put him in that young, player development category. Pathway. I guess Steres could be in there too, but he and Sebastian Lletget are the only guys left from the last Bruce Arena team.
Yeah, I mean, Steres isn't even young anymore. I mean, that's not really an argument, is it? You can't say that he's part of a young player. I mean, Julian Araujo, Efrain Alvarez, and Cameron Dunbar, and Kai Koreniuk, and Carlos Harvey, and even Jonathan Klinsmann are the young guys, on this team. Even Nick DePuy is probably a little bit younger, skews a little bit younger than some of those. So you could put that in there. But I mean, yeah, cost effective. I mean, that's what you always sort of look at. And for me, Steres is one of those guys. I'm sort of looking at some of the other guys on there. You wouldn't say, Joe Corona makes, over $500,000. So no, I don't think you're going to go there. Perry Kitchen at $450 is probably, I think he's a little, if he played like he did under Dominic Kinnear the last 3 games, and really maybe the last month of the season, maybe $450 ends up being reasonable for where he's at. I think if he stays with the LA Galaxy, he's one of those guys who you'd have to probably pull back on his salary a little bit to give yourself some room on some other guys. Zubak is making $75,000 in 2019. He did give you 2 goals during the season, but he also gave you a lot of minutes where he did relatively little. So I don't know if you go with that. I mean, Julian Araujo, that again would get into your young players. Who's not a young player, right? I mean, Julian Araujo in 2019 showed an $86,000 wage fee. I mean, come on, what you're getting out of that right now would be a big thing. Even Efrain Alvarez at $75,000 in 2019 dollars, is a good deal when you look at some of those. But again,
and when you talk about Steres' age, I don't think I want a young center back. I think I'd like a late 20s center back. I don't want some green kid in there that hasn't seen I think center back is one position that really you have to use the gray matter and the experience and having seen things before. I think you want a guy. I think Steris is a good age for a center back, actually.
Your center backs can be a little bit older, right? They're not in the speed positions on the outside, so they can be a little wily. Whenever Greg Berhalter was in there playing for the LA Galaxy, he was the wily veteran. He wasn't as quick as he used to be, but he still knew how to take the angles, and he harassed people whenever he needed to harass people. It was always fun to watch him. Eddie Lewis sort of redefined some of that stuff. Todd Donovan, you talk about that. I mean, even if he's on an outside position, Todd wasn't the fastest guy, but he wasn't the slowest guy either, and sort of could take the right angles towards things. So yeah, I mean, defense and goalkeepers, they can be a little bit older. In the center and midfield, you probably don't want a 35-year-old Luca Modric, as he's getting older and he's not as mobile as he used to be. But Pirlo played in Major League Soccer, so and basically he didn't move, and he played on the world's tiniest field. So I mean, there's ways to fit everybody into a roster whenever you look at it. I just think that obviously the biggest offseason thing that we have to watch here, Kevin, is what the LA Galaxy are going to do for a coach, and not only that, but I think the part two to that, what are you going to do for a coach, is how you make decisions without that coach. And really, there's going to be, again, roster decisions that are going to be made, and they're going to be made without a coach. And it happened before whenever, Guillermo Schelotto eventually came on with the LA Galaxy. Dennis DeCloso was brought in late into that sort of process. They hired a general manager first, but was already sort of behind the ball whenever it came to getting through that first, the option decline and the contract pickups that are going to happen here again, on November 30th. So there is not a lot of time for anybody to sort of get spun up, and those decisions have real consequences whenever you go down and look for things. I'd also like to point out that Jorgen Skjelvik, who is still technically on loan with the LA Galaxy, did get called up to the Norwegian international team, and I was sort of asking around if that was because he suddenly got very good, and the answer was no. They needed an all internationally based Norwegian team to be able to play in some of the friendlies, and so they got Jorgen Skjelvik, so he's going to be playing on the Norwegian team, but it wasn't because of form.
I saw that Ola Kamara was not on that team. He was with DC United, right? So he would have been eligible to be called up because they're out of the playoffs.
Yep. Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Now, what do you know about this November 30th deadline for giving options out? And the reason I ask is, does that include playoff teams? Because if it doesn't.
No, it depends. If you've been eliminated from the playoffs, then yes, it does. Or actually, I think there's even a later date on it. I'd have to go back and look at the press release.
That is so screwy because it doesn't allow teams to know who is going to be out there. So, for example, if you theoretically want to get rid of Joe Corona because you're going to pick up a guy who you think is going to get released by the Chicago Fire, you have no way of knowing if that's going to happen. And well, I guess Fire is not going to be in the playoffs probably by November 30th, but I mean, it just makes it so difficult to do that. And then at the same token, if all teams were under the November 30th deadline, could you imagine telling a guy, hey, we're not giving you a contract for next year, but you're going to start next week in the conference final? I mean, what motivation does that player have to go out and play then when you've already told him that we don't want you back? This is just another goofy thing that MLS does that if there's a rhyme or reason to it, they certainly haven't explained it, and it doesn't make much sense to me to do it that way. Why not just wait 2 more weeks and everyone can do it at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been because it gets extended so far out. I mean, I remember whenever the LA Galaxy, when they would win an MLS Cup, Kevin, and I think within 3 days of winning the MLS Cup, they had to come out with their option declines and pickups. Right. And so I have to imagine the teams already know who they're going to pick up in terms of the team itself. They know who's going to be picked up and who's not. Right. And then basically they wait till playing is over and they get it done. I mean, I guess you could wait for everybody to be done, but it probably limits the notification that the players probably would want whenever that comes down. And, again, some of these are, I think, if you're the LA Galaxy, you have some options out there that are coming up, but I don't know that any of these are super hard decisions to make. You're just going to make them without a coach, which means that, on some of these guys, maybe there is, something that maybe you could fit a different piece in. I mean, we're looking at somebody like Joe Corona. Do you pick up Joe Corona's option? I mean, we don't know what the money is, Kevin, but do you pick up Joe Corona's option, who's a targeted allocation money player? He made $550,000 in 2019. Are you going to go out and pick up his option? I think that's a real case of you have to look and figure out if you can upgrade in those positions and what money you can save in those. And I don't know that Joe Corona is 100% the answer. Now, you might say that, maybe you're going to keep one of Joe Corona or Perry Kitchen. They play two different positions, technically, both in the midfield, but one's more defensive, one's a little more box-to-box, a little more offensive sway, maybe on Joe Corona as well. But you have a chance of being out of both of those guys, and if you got rid of both of those guys, you suddenly have all close to $1 million to open up in the center of midfield. And can you do something with $1 million differently than you were going to do with Joe Corona and Perry Kitchen? I mean,
well, if you do that 12 times, you could get Luca Modric.
See, basically you just need two players.
I should be a GM. Yeah,
you should, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a bunch of, we went over the contracts, but Jonathan Dos Santos seems like he's signed through 2021. Cristian Pavon's loan expires in 2020. Javier Chicharito Hernandez, I believe, is signed through 2022 for a 3-year deal, and there's a possibility there might even be an option on the end of that, which I
thought the option was the third year. I thought it was 2 and an option, but in any case, he's back next year.
Yeah, he's back next year. He's coming back next year.
Bingham, Kitchen, and Rolfe Bingham, Kitchen, and Rolfe are definitely out of contract, and,
yes.
and Pipo has 1 more year left. And Question has an option. Corona has an option.
And Bingham and Kitchen, I'd have to look at it, but one of those two guys is probably a free agent as well, just because they've put in a lot of years into this league. I would have to imagine that Bingham, probably Kitchen, might be free agents. I'd have to go look at the regulations because you need a certain amount of service, you need a certain amount of a whole bunch of different things, a certain amount of years, and then you have to be of a certain age at the same time in order to be for free agents. So it would be one of those you have to take a look at. So I mean, there could be some motivation there. You talked about Rolf Felcher. I don't think the LA Galaxy bring him back at $242,000 of 2019 dollars. I don't think there's a real appetite to sort of keep Rolf around. So that's not happening. Dan Stara's just resigned. We know Insua just signed this year, so he probably has at least 2 years, which is 2021, could possibly be 3 years, 2022. Yoni Gonzalez, his loan expires. I don't know that you saw enough to sort of go back and say that you have to have him for next year, because I didn't see enough out of him to make that. So there are some questions here the LA Galaxy have to make, and they have to make them quickly. And I just feel like I don't feel like there's a lot of light at the end of this LA Galaxy tunnel right now, and even if you do something which I think would be a smart move, which is to get Dominic Kinnear in there, I believe that there's a good chance the LA Galaxy are an improved team. But without sort of understanding the roster moves that they're going to have to make in this offseason, it would be real hard for me to sort of jump back and say I feel confident about this team, because I felt confident about this team this year. And you see where that sort of goes.
One thing with the Dominic Kinnear thing maybe could get really interesting. And when I look at all those names and the positions that we talked about, I really think goalkeeper is the biggest question. And the reason I say that is there's just not a lot of goalkeepers that seem to be available year to year. Now, the Galaxy may have a lead on somebody they really want. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, say they don't. So maybe Bingham, who I know, again, a lot of supporters don't like him, but he's a solid guy. He's a veteran. He's going to cost a lot of money to bring back, and I don't think you bring him back on a 1-year deal. I don't think it's let's try to get through this season. I think Bingham would want a couple of year deal at least, and probably more money. Do you invest that in him, knowing that he's had 3 shaky years here? Well, maybe one way you do that is you say Dominic Kinnear had him in San Jose during his very best seasons when he was a national team goalkeeper. Hey, Dom, what do you think if you become our coach? Is this, can you work with this guy? That's where maybe one instance where getting Dominic on board quickly, if that's the way they go, can actually help you make some of those decisions. I don't think you make a big decision without Dominic if that's where you're going to go eventually.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. All right, not a lot coming up. There will be show number 800 on Thursday night. Again, we're not really doing much for that. I have one guest in mind.
How come I'm never the milestone shows? Because show 799.
Because you're the odd show, both in terms of attitude, personality, and numbering. So you're the
I'm
odd
quirky.
show.
I'm quirky.
Yeah, I've been told that. That's what I've been told. So you always get your. Congratulations, $7.99, Kevin. You did it. You did.
Do you know there was a scene in one of the first Ted Lassos where they have to decide whether they want to be a panda or a lion?
I remember that, and I did think of you, which is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to think about you that much in my everyday life. So
I was glad to make the show.
All right. Let's see.
I chose Panda.
You chose. I knew you would, and we saw how that turned out in Ted Lasso. So I'm not exactly convinced that was the right. The lion was definitely the correct choice. Zlatan had it right, as is normally the case. Anything else you want to touch on? I was going to say there's not much that's sort of coming up this week. I was told that if the LA Galaxy do exit interviews, there's a possibility it could be this week. I just don't think they have the stomach for it. I don't think they're going to do it. So, hey, maybe they'll prove me wrong when they'll do exit interviews because I know that I would certainly like to talk to some of the players and sort of find out, what their thoughts are and sort of wrapping up the season and what their thoughts are for next season, whether they'll be back or not. I mean, this is the time when you really get to answer those questions, and I just don't think that's going to happen. So,
but if they did that, I mean, they would totally be tipping their hand on who's exiting, right?
I mean, they don't know. I mean, sometimes the players don't know because the decision hasn't been made. But you could certainly, talk to somebody. And granted, we sort of know with Sacha Kljestan, he has an option up for 2021. He's already talking, and if you saw, he tweeted out today and sort of said, "Hey, it didn't end the way that we wanted to. We only played, in front of the fans for one season, but I felt the love." And he goes, "And we're going to fix this together next year." Now, if you want to read into that, you could say that Sacha Kljestan's coming back and his option's been picked up for 2021, right? And that he could be coming back. But of course, anybody's going to say that right now. That's not necessarily, something that's bad. But I have a good feeling that Sacha Kljestan's going to be back for 2021, and I think that's the correct move. I know there's lots of people who disagree, and that'll be fine. You can disagree. I just know a little bit of what happens inside that locker room, and I know that Sacha Kljestan's an important part of that. But yeah, I mean, you could ask somebody like, Joe Corona. You know how this is, Kevin. Nobody ever wants to tell us when contracts are up, and nobody ever wants to tell us, sort of what contract situations are. And exit interviews are the one time when you really can ask those questions and find out those things. Hey, Jonathan Dos Santos, you have a year left on your contract, right? Yes, I do. Okay, cool. Well, then, are you planning on coming back? Has there been any talk about you possibly renegotiating your deal so that way you can stay longer? So that way you're not a designated player? So that way you're just a targeted allocation money player? I mean, these are the questions that you could sort of get into, but only in exit interviews does that really make sense.
Well, and I think this information should be public, not just because I think all information should be public and not because it helps me as a journalist, but for fans. I mean, this way fans can hold the front office's feet to the fire. If they don't know, what the salaries are, who's back, if they can't see over Dennis's shoulder and Chris Klein's shoulder and know what information they're looking at when they make these decisions, then the fans really don't know if these are good decisions or not. I mean, if they let Joe Corona go, and we don't know what his salary was, we can look at that and say, well, that was a good decision or a bad decision. We don't know. I just think this information should be public. I think fans love that stuff. You see it in other sports. Hey, this guy's not worth his contract. We're going to trade his contract to get a cheaper guy. All those things that fans talk about, we can't do that in MLS because that information is all so closely held. It's like it's, Fort Knox, and we can't be told. We can't be, they don't trust us with this information. And I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, it gives us an incomplete picture, and then we can end up being overly harsh on somebody. Maybe Sebastian Lletget has a contract that if he plays next year, he's going to get $3 million a year. Well, all of a sudden, you getting rid of Sebastian Lletget makes a lot more sense than if you just sort of sold him real quick, and everybody's like, wait a minute, that was a guy who was really important to the team, right? I mean, you could make that argument. You can go back to AJ De La Garza whenever AJ De La Garza was traded. What the numbers were and what the numbers are in that would have been an important context to understand if that was reasonable or not. The LA Galaxy took the brunt of that, and quite honestly, they deserved to take the brunt of it because the details were never sort of put out. I don't know if it makes any sense. In fact, I have a pretty good feeling it didn't make sense. But because you don't know the numbers, Kevin, because you don't know the contract situation, you get to base that off of emotion more than anything else. And so I think that they do themselves a disservice, and it also feels like they don't want to be held accountable. I mean, this is all of MLS, by the way. They don't want to be held accountable. They don't want people knowing that information. So you can't sit there and criticize and second guess, and make suggestions. I mean, can Galaxy fans figure out how to fill out the roster, the cap space roster? You can't because you don't know the numbers.
Well, let me give you maybe I don't know it's not a metaphor. I don't know what the hell it is. But if you go to a movie, you're not invested in that movie. You want to see the movie. You enjoy the movie. You like the plot. You like the actors. But, you don't really care what Warner Brothers or whoever paid them, and you have no financial incentive one way or the other. I think with a supporter of a sports team, you're invested in that team. You buy the jersey, you're a season ticket holder. You identify as somebody from the LA Riot Squad or whatever. It's on your Twitter, profile. That's who you are. You are part of the team. And I think when MLS acts more like a movie company. We will put on a production for you. You can come and see it, but we're not going to share with you any of the relevant information. I think that's a big mistake. If you're a Dodger fan, you know that Justin Turner's a free agent this year. You know he came on the field with COVID. Maybe it's time for him to go. You know that he's 35. You know that Jock Peterson is a free agent. You know all these things, and you know a little bit about the salaries. You can play general manager and think along with your team. I think with MLS, it's more like they want you to cheer for Gone with the Wind, and that just doesn't work.
All right, let's wrap it up there. Show on Thursday night, and then we will be off certainly for the Thanksgiving week. No shows Thanksgiving week, and sort of taking a little break there. We'll see when we return, and if we return, might only be one show a week. We'll sort of keep you updated as we head into off-season mode here for a little bit, and I get to recharge some batteries. Kevin gets to recharge some batteries as well, and hopefully we'll be able to give you all the important stuff as it starts to break down and sort of come this way. So that's sort of our schedule right now. Kevin, anything else? We good?
This was a long show, dude. This is too long.
This is what happens whenever I say, if we go 30 minutes, I'll be happy. And so instead, we yammered and stammered through. I fell asleep at least 30 minutes ago. But there's so many things that are wrong with the LA Galaxy. It's hard to be concise about it, because every time I think about things and I start to put, two thoughts together, it turns into five thoughts of all the things that are sort of going sideways. And even on a day that has relatively little news, it still feels like, you're able to fill up with some interesting tidbits here and there, and certainly social media keeps driving that as well. So shout out to all the people who tweet and all the people on the Discord who continue the LA Galaxy talk even as the offseason is going on. And keep me entertained. Keep me on my toes trying to figure some of this stuff out. All right, if you're looking for Mr. Kevin Baxter on Twitter, it's at KBaxter11. Head on over to LATimes.com for all of his soccer coverage. U.S. men's national team, women's national team, soccer in Southern California, soccer around the United States, and a little bit around the world as well. Go follow him, LATimes.com. At KBaxter11 on Twitter. All right, looking for me on Twitter, it's at Guesman, at Galaxy Podcast, and cornerofthegalaxy.com, where you can catch our articles, our podcasts, all that fun stuff right there, cornerofthegalaxy.com. All right, for Mr. Kevin the Panda Baxter, I'm Josh Pato Guesman. You've been listening to Corner of the Galaxy from the box on cornerofthegalaxy.com. Have a great one, everybody.
You've been listening to the Corner of the Galaxy podcast on cornerofthegalaxy.com. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Galaxy Podcast. And be sure to check out and subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook by searching for Corner of the Galaxy. Fans, we thank you for listening, and we ask that you be kind and courteous to your neighbors as you leave the podcast. We thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you again. Until then, I'm Michael Araujo, and on behalf of the entire Corner of the Galaxy crew, goodbye, everybody.